What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Roots Refuge Farm. I am in the warmest place on my property. I have felt so cold for the last few days. It's just, I have such a frost tender flower, and when the chill sinks in, oh, I just have such a hard time shaking it. So I was in my house, I was working on stuff in my house. My house is cold, and I thought, you know what? I bet I know where I can go warm up. And it is 83 degrees in this greenhouse. That's 27 Celsius. Which is glorious. This is what I needed. I needed an incubator. And it literally is an incubator. We have all these seeds over here tucked into the soil. It's brand new, that none of them have come up yet. This is all like more cauliflowers, broccolis, kohlrabi, brassicas, essentially, cabbages that will go out into the garden after it warms up a little bit, maybe in another 6 weeks. They'll be ready to go out into the outside garden or into the high tunnel. As we harvest things, there will be open spaces. I might actually get hot in here, which is saying something because I don't think I've felt hot for over a week. In all seriousness, I have some autoimmune issues, and whenever I start having like really bad flare of inflammation, which I am currently in the middle of a really bad flare, I cannot regulate my temperature well. So I take a lot of hot baths. And in this case, on a sunny day, it hasn't been sunny in weeks. On a sunny day, I can come out to my greenhouse, and I do. Whenever I'm having a flare, I spend a lot of time in the greenhouse when it's really warm in here because it feels so good. It's actually warm enough that I don't really have to bundle as much. So today I am actually starting some seeds. For those of you who are local to me or track with me on when you start things, I kind of have windows of the year that I consider like, it's my gamble seed starting. Will these produce? Will it go well? Maybe. I mean, it probably should. It's January. We'll be in spring in no time. I've got a greenhouse. I plan on giving it some sort of supplemental heat to keep things from like freezing real bad in here. Now, I'm not going to start anything that's frost tender because that would be foolish this early. However, these things that I'm going to start can handle freezing lightly. So I think that they'll probably be fine in the greenhouse. But if you follow along with me, I do want you to know that any sort of planting outside the like strictly recommended time frames, you're always taking a little bit of a risk whenever you do that. And I don't mind that. Keep life spicy, taking some risks here and there. So I've got these little pots, and they have some little spider webs in them. All right, I've got a wheelbarrow full of potting soil here. I just start my seeds in potting soil, and I've got a handful of things. The seeds that I'm starting today, they're all kind of old. I am gonna be ordering some new seeds this year. I actually have already ordered some that I'm gonna unbox with you guys and all of that. Of course, I saved seeds from the garden, so I've got Ziploc baggies full of saved seeds. That's more for the summer garden. And with these things, I'm just gonna sow them a little thicker than I normally would because the seeds are a few years old. And so the germination may be a little bit lower than it would have been when they were new. But I'm gonna sow them anyway. If you have older seeds, seeds don't expire. I know they have a sell by date on them. That's so that seed companies have a standard that they have to follow where they can't sell you old seeds that have poor germination, but it's not an expiration date. I routinely sow seeds in my garden that are at least like 4 or 5 years old. That's very common. When they get up to like 7 to 10 years old, I do notice germination goes down. And there are certain things like carrots, for instance, those seeds don't last a really long time. The germination goes down really quick on those. I think corn is another one, onions is another one. But no matter what it is that you have, if you have old seeds, if you throw them in the trash, you'll get 0% germination rate guaranteed. So might as well put them in some soil, right? So I'm just gonna sow these things today, and I thought that I would come and have a chat with you guys. I've got all these great videos outlined about seed buying and all of the relevant stuff to the season, but I've felt really cruddy the last few days. I joke whenever I'm not feeling well that I don't have any personality, that I'm all out of personality. My personality's run dry right now. Probably not exactly accurate, but you know, it is hard to be enthusiastic about things when your body hurts. So today, wasn't gonna shoot anything. I had this idea to come out to the greenhouse to warm up, plant some seeds, get some soil therapy, and of course, that makes me want to turn the camera on and share it with you. So here I am. though you might hear the drag in my voice a little bit today. We're gonna just jump between life topics and gardening topics here, as one does when they are gardening and living life simultaneously. This morning, my sister-in-law messaged me. She was asking if I had any footage of Jaina, which it's weird to me, and what I'm about to talk to you about, it really reiterates what I'm saying. I have lived such a significant part of my life on social media at this point. I started regularly sharing Instagram stories when that feature came out, pretty much. And it's been 10 years. I've been here on social media for 10 years. And of course, YouTube, I started regularly posting on YouTube in 2018. I'd posted, a couple dozen videos before that, if even that many. My sister-in-law messaged me and asked if I had any footage of their mom. She died in 2018, and she's like, I don't even have any recordings of her voice or anything like that. And I was like, well, I'll go back and look. And I didn't think I had very much from YouTube because I wasn't really regularly posting, but then it occurred to me that I did regular Instagram stories throughout the day for probably 2.5 years before I ever had YouTube. So I went back into my Instagram archives, and I probably spent about an hour and a half watching all these stories from 2017. And oh my gosh, I have laughed, I have cried. It is so wild to me, like seeing little Benjamin too in diapers, seeing the day that I brought Bear home. Ew. Gardeners are not supposed to say ew when they see earthworms, but here I am. I'm gonna go free this guy outside. But it was just absolutely incredible. Not just seeing, anytime you get to like look in a time capsule and see your babies when they were babies. Of course, Jackson's graduating high school this year, starting college. Asher is 6'2". So it's wild, like seeing my babies when they were still babies. But it was really also interesting to see Roots Refuge Farm when it was still very much a baby. And knowing what place we were in then, and like standing from this point looking back on that, I just wanted to be like, hey girl, quit stressing. Like, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be okay. Because I just remember that season of just toiling inside myself, of desperately wanting the farm, and it being, for all intents and purposes, completely impossible. And it's pretty wild to see us doing our best with what we had then. Definitely had an emotional and reflective morning this morning when it comes to those things. It's also just a really different world that we lived in. 2017 to 2024, a lot has changed, and just our culture and in the world we live in. And I came home, I went through all these archive stories. I had to go meet today down at Beulah, our roastery, a local newspaper reporter that's doing a piece on Beulah for the local newspaper. It was really nice getting to chat with her. I came home and I was chatting with Will at the table while we were eating lunch. He was talking about the act of growing food and how much that has changed, like in the public view over the course of the last several years. With there's pre-COVID, there's like the COVID years, and then there's now post-COVID, the way people view growing food. I've got to get my act together. My seeds are everywhere. They're all over my house. They're all in my pantry. They're in my office downtown. I gotta get my stuff together. I don't have all my pots organized. It's the worst to be like chomping at the bit to do something. Like I've been thinking all fall in through the winter, the early part of, Christmas holiday season, and then starting to get cold, and I'm like, oh, I just wish it was seed starting season. And then I don't prepare for it, and then it sneaks up on me. I'm so bad about that. I need to sit down and do some preparation. I got my tags. I do have some of these in my little dresser over there. Today I'm starting some seeds for rutabagas. Now rutabagas are a root vegetable, kind of similar to a turnip. And I'm starting them, I'm going to cluster plant them. So I'm going to put about 5 seeds, since these are a little older, in each one of these cells. And then when they come up, I'll trim them down to only having 3. And then I'll let 3 grow by each other, and I'll move these out. That's something, I don't always do that. When I direct sow, I just put 1 seed in each space and let them get a little bit bigger. But Charles Dowding actually is the person that I learned that from, doing that little cluster starting. It's nice if you're wanting to start seeds inside. So like, I don't really have a place out in the garden right now that I want to put rutabaga seeds, but if I go ahead and start them in the greenhouse, we'll either make space or it'll warm up enough outside that I can move them out. So if I'm going to start root vegetables, rutabagas and turnips namely, those are the main ones that I'll do this with. I'll do cluster sowing. With radishes, I don't do it just because radishes grow so fast that I don't ever start those inside. And then you can't really do it with anything that has a taproot. So like a carrot or a parsnip, you couldn't cluster sow those. At least I wouldn't imagine. Maybe somebody can contradict that, but I've never done it, and I can't imagine it would work. Taproots don't like getting moved around. They will stunt and stop growing if you try to transplant them. That's why you typically don't start carrots. You direct sow them. I love rutabagas though. We really haven't harvested very many this year. There's some growing out in the greenhouse, but seems like this is gonna be the flavor of our early spring as it's currently growing. All right, I'm gonna take these trays and just set them down here. You won't be able to see them, but that way, once I'm done sewing these, I'll just set them down in these trays. If you're wondering, these containers are from Bootstrap Farmer. I wanna say maybe they've reformulated these. These are quite old. I've had them for a long time. And then these 10-20 trays as well are from Bootstrap Farmer. People ask me a lot about my seed sorting stuff. I've done videos in the past kind of lining out all of my stuff. I'll find that video and link it. It has links to the different things, but I do highly recommend these Bootstrap Farmer trays because they last a really long time. I mean, if you buy the cheap ones at the store, you're gonna get 1 season out of them, maybe 2, but the second season they're gonna be really brittle. I've got Bootstrap Farmer trays that at this point are like 4 or 5 years old. So that is saying something. And if I'm being honest, I don't really take great care of my stuff. Like, I'm not like irresponsible per se, but I mean, look around. I was talking to my mother on the phone this morning. She's a part of my Facebook group, Friends of Roots Refuge Farm. And she was talking about mailing a friend that she made on that group some crystals that she dug up from her yard, some rocks. I was saying, I just love the fact that people have made real life friendships out of that group. I think it's awesome. She was like, Jess, you just have the best community. And I was like, you know, I completely agree with that. And I was like, and I always say that. I regularly tell people I have the best community. The people who comment on my videos and are a part of like my different groups and stuff are so kind and so uplifting. And for a long time, I attributed that to just gardeners. Gardeners are, you know, patient people and typically, like, I think, kind people. I was like, I don't know. And she said, well, we have to call things what we want them to be. Like, if you call a child bad all the time, they're going to misbehave. Whereas even if they're misbehaving, you constantly call them good, they'll believe that that's who they are. I mean, we have to call people who they are. And so often, like, people become what we insist that they are. And anyway, she said then, she was like, I'm sorry I called you Messy Jessie all those years. Because I am, man. And it's funny, like, we had a laugh over it because I am absolutely Messy Jessie. But if anybody wants to start calling me, like, Tidy Jessie, maybe I'll believe it. That said, I mean, like, my Bootstrap Farmer trays, every year we have to pull them out and clean them off and all that stuff because, I mean, we end up just putting things away dirty, which you shouldn't do, you know what I mean? And even in my neglect, even in my, like, ride it hard and put it up wet way of using all my gardening stuff, my Bootstrap Farmer trays have lasted a long time. If something can withstand me for a long time, it's gotta be high quality. Anyway, I'll take you on bunny trails, but I'll always get you back. Will and I were talking about the public view of food growing. And I think this is such an interesting conversation. And one that maybe I don't have enough, you know, with the way that I think about things. Maybe I don't speak up enough about it. But it is funny that, like, before COVID, if you were anything, I use the term prepper really mildly. I think that pulls up the wrong connotation from what I'm trying to say. Like, for me, preparedness is just wisdom. Preparedness is saying I'm going to be a creator instead of a consumer. Preparedness is saying I'm not going to be dependent on other people for the well-being of my family. I like to think about what would I do in some sort of situation. And preparedness is not just a societal collapse thing. Though that can make for interesting conversations if you can have them without becoming completely terrified. Storms and unforeseen circumstances and supply chain issues and train derailments, and I mean, there have been so many things just over the last handful of years that I've watched happen and thought, man, I would face that situation a lot better if I was prepared versus if I wasn't. Oh, I'm sitting on them. Oh, I lost my tags. I was sitting on them. And for, I think, pre-COVID, maybe people didn't really have the capacity to imagine being in a situation where preparedness was required. And I think maybe that's part of what happened that caused such a massive wave into the homesteading and gardening community. A lot of people realized for the first time, like, whoa, I'm really dependent on a really fragile system. Okay, next we're doing bull's blood beets, cluster sown as well, like the rutabagas. The thing is with beets is that one seed of a beet can actually have multiple seeds in it. It can grow multiple plants, but these seeds are a little older. So I'm gonna sow them a little more on the heavy side, and then I can thin them out if I need to. We have been on a beet kick lately. Jeremiah, namely, has been eating beets on arugula with burrata cheese. And then I've mixed up some like a whole grain mustard with a little bit of maple syrup and some vinegar and oil, and mix that to make a vinaigrette and toss it all in there. Very nice. So I did this video this week called Should You Bother with Vegetable Gardening? You may have seen it. And in that I was kind of just talking about the benefits of growing a vegetable garden. And it got just a really nice response. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here on this channel. I mean, my goal with making that video was not necessarily telling you, my viewer, the case for vegetable gardening. I mean, you're already here. You probably already convinced of that. It was more to create a resource that you could share with your neighbor Sally, who has mentioned the last 3 years that, oh, she'd like to grow a garden, but she just doesn't know. You know, like it was meant in that regard. I really kind of meant it more as being a tool to be able to be shared or stumbled upon by people who are on the fence. I talked in that video a lot about security, and Will, of course, is real into permaculture. He and I have very fascinating conversations. He's somebody that I can have my what if scenario conversations with, and we'll legitimately talk about logistics of like, what would you do if XYZ happened? And like sometimes you have that conversation of like, what would you do if you couldn't go to the grocery store? And people will respond and they'll be like, oh, well, I would just live off the land. I would just this, I would just that. And I'm like, okay, you obviously don't have experience with this. You don't know how hard it is, what you're saying. You don't know how unobtainable it is, what you're saying. So what would you eat? What would you do? Like, I like to have like real what if conversations that are very realistic. What would you do? And so Will and I have conversations like that. And today we were talking about the stages of like the acceptance of growing food in our society and how celebrated it is, which led into this conversation about resilience. And while I like having what would you do, here's the scenario conversations, I think that it makes me feel like my brain is being sharpened rather than like being lulled to sleep by the stresses of day to day. What really excites me in the actuality of today, not in a what if scenario, but in the real situation of what I'm living in today, is I love to talk about resilience. So if the idea of resilience is new to you, it's something that's talked about a lot in the permaculture world, but I think that we would do well just as humans to talk about resilience more and think about resilience more. And it's basically like, resilience is any layer of protection against adversity. Resilience is any measure you have in place to be sufficient. Resilience is how well you bounce back, how well you survive, how well you thrive. The beautiful thing I love about having the conversation about resilience over all other things when it comes to homesteading, oh man, I still have these, is that anybody can think this way. Looking at those videos this morning from 2017, I had a really hard time at that period in our life of thinking about, like, what would I do if something went crazy? Because I felt so stuck. I felt, so without resources. And this was early on in us having our farm. Now, if you go back even 3 or 4 years before that, when we were living in town, I felt really stuck. Unfortunately, when you feel stuck, you may be limited. You may feel like a sitting duck in certain conversations. You may feel very afraid whenever you watch the news and, whenever COVID happened and you were, had just a couple days of food in your house and limitations were coming up in the grocery store and stuff like that. Like, it's completely okay to feel afraid in those situations. When we switch the conversation to resilience, though, it gives you something that you can be proactive in no matter what else is going on, no matter what limitations may very well be there. So today, Will and I were talking about the dandelions blooming. I actually mentioned it in my last vlog. And he said he had taken some home and made a salad out of them. And I was talking to him about making dandelion jelly, which I usually do in the spring. And we were thinking about the other things that we can make with dandelions. And that led into this conversation of resilience and paying attention to what's growing around us that doesn't require our hand in cultivation, and also creating systems which layer in resilience. Like, for instance, I'd really like to get some Jerusalem artichokes. They're very aggressive growers, and I'd like to plant them off somewhere like along the property line, like by the woods, somewhere they can really grow and not be a hindrance to anything we're trying to do. Because Jerusalem artichokes, if you plant them, they'll take over an area and they'll continue growing and they'll continue coming back, which means at any point you can go out there and dig up a certain measure of food. You're not having to cultivate like the garden. I love the garden, don't get me wrong. I want to keep gardening. I want to know how to garden. But those little layers of resilience, every single thing you're able to either establish, prepare, or learn gives you a layer of resilience. So for instance, if you know how to go outside and forage certain herbs and dry them and create tinctures, you have a layer of resilience. If you know how to cook from scratch, you have a huge layer of resilience. I've been reading this book. It's called it's an old library book that I got. I think it's called The Lost 10 Years or 10 Years Lost, something like that. And it's stories from the Depression. What's fascinating when you read about this time and not so far off U.S. history, we have a very clear case of people who were resilient, needing their resilience to get through. And it's crazy to me how many people, drop my containers. How many people don't know how to cook a pot of dry beans, don't know how to make bread from flour. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I recently started the Farmer's Table, was because in the onset of all of this inflation that we've been seeing, I had this thought, because I'm telling people how to garden and homestead, and I want to continue to do that, but I'm hearing more and more people say, I can't afford it. I can't afford to move. I can't afford to leave this area. I can't find land that I can buy. I cannot find an affordable place. I can't afford to get the infrastructure started. And when people are starting to feel like really squeezed by their grocery budget and increasing rent costs and increasing power costs and all of these different things, for people who are going paycheck to paycheck, the idea of getting some land feels way out there. It feels awful to feel the urgency to move while you feel stuck. It's one of the most insecure feelings I've ever known, because I've known it. And in thinking about that is where I was like, you know what, it's time to do a cooking channel. And you guys heard me say for years that I did not want to make cooking videos. I did not like making cooking videos. It turns out I actually like it better than I realized, because I realized that if I was going to make cooking videos, I was going to have to do it extremely down to earth and honest. I'm not a perfect cook. I'm a good cook, but I do a lot of things that people tell you not to do. And for a long time, it intimidated me to share that because I want to be good at the things that I share. I want to share what is admirable and what's supposed to happen. And so being vulnerable and sharing the reality that's less than perfect can be kind of hard. But I decided to get over that feeling because I realized that if people knew how to cook a pot of beans and make bread from flour and yeast, that they would have this massive layer of resilience. Like right now, with food costs being so difficult for a lot of people, it's a lot more difficult if you have to be dependent on convenience. And I've brought this up multiple times recently. I'll probably bring it up again. So I'm sorry, those of you who watch every video, you kind of get bear the brunt of the repetition. But repetition really isn't bad for us. Repetition is good for us. And sometimes it helps us follow through on things that we, heard the first time and thought, yeah, that's important and I should do that. And then it kind of slips our mind. So maybe it's not a bad thing to repeat. But I think really viewing your life and thinking, where could I add resilience? And maybe it's not in resources. Maybe you can't add resilience by resources. But what about knowledge? What about skills? We just live in such an incredible age that we can learn to do things pretty easily, all things considered. And having skills at your fingertips, even if you don't have the resources to use those skills the way you think that you'd like to, learn them anyway. Turn your waiting room into a classroom. While you are waiting to have the fulfillment of what you're hoping for, learn how to use it. So that when it is in your hands, when you do have an opportunity, when the ball does get thrown to you, you know exactly what to do with it, and you don't have to waste time at that point learning and ultimately making costly mistakes. All right, I just planted some chamomile. I have a whole bed out in my garden where I grew chamomile last year. I highly suspect that it's gonna come back. It's come back before, so I think that it's pretty well established, but just on the off chance that it doesn't, I'm just starting a couple of little containers here of this Zloty. I know I'm saying it wrong. I think it's Swedish. It's Zloty Lan, Zlotylan. Either way, I love chamomile. Makes a great tea. Very, very relaxing. It's good medicine for your skin. And it's just overall very calming. So I like to grow it. I think that I have some that will come up. If it does start coming up, I'll either throw these in a green stalk or I'll put them somewhere else in the garden or I'll give them to somebody. But I don't want to wait, because if I get to the point that that hasn't come up and it's too late to start seeds, then I will have missed out. The beautiful thing about turning your waiting room into a classroom and layering resilience into your life is, if nothing else, it's kind of like any other preparedness thing. If you never need it, awesome. That's the hope. I mean, the hope is that we never need resilience, because if I never needed my resilience, it means I never took a knock, like I never got knocked down and had to hop back up. I never had to take a blow and face that. That would be awesome. But it's in the calm times that we have to make a decision to be fortified that if a storm comes, we'd be able to withstand it. And when we live in a world that is so fear-driven, I mean, I don't think we realize what, I honestly think this. I want to just pose this question, and my opinion doesn't have to be the right one, but think about this. Engage with me. Tell me what you think here. I actually don't think that we realize as humans, and I'll say as a society, as in a culture, but I know that even this video will reach probably 40 different countries, which is amazing. But I'm speaking as an American, but I think that it's a worldwide thing. I do not think we realized as a people how traumatized we are. Like, think about this. I was talking about this, Will, and then my sister-in-law ended up chiming in, and we just had this really riveting conversation. Sometimes I wish I could just turn a camera on in those moments, because it would make for probably a pretty explosive video. But I remember Columbine when I don't remember what year that was. Maybe it was 96, 98. I was a kid. I was maybe like 12 or 13 when that happened. And I remember going to like a youth meeting or something that was like honoring the people, the lives lost in Columbine. And I remember being like deeply, deeply troubled for weeks over this. I mean, so much so that I still have these very vivid memories of like faces that I saw in the news and like just being deeply troubled. I remember being about 9 and hearing news about the conflict in Bosnia, the Bosnian conflict. And I remember seeing news footage of that when I was about 9 years old and feeling really terrified. And then, of course, you know, at 14 or 15, I sat in an English classroom and watched the Twin Towers fall. And I can sit here as a, nearly 40-year-old millennial, and I can list off countless events where I witnessed something through a screen, but nonetheless experienced the emotions of witnessing something massively traumatic. I mean, like really, really hard. And I then go on to think about like specifically my grandparents' generation that lived through the Depression, World War II, Vietnam, Korea. I mean, just like tons of insecurity, tons of wars and trouble. And I'm thinking about the fact that like that generation raised my parents. I mean, my parents' generation went through all kinds of stuff. I mean, like some of the stories that my mom has told me of things that she witnessed or encountered as a teenager. And then I think about my generation, which has been called the Snowflake Generation. Millennials have been given such a bad rap for being so tender and soft. And of course, now everybody's speaking up about mental illness and mental unwellness. But I'm sitting here going like, hold on a second. I literally grew up with the internet telling me all the bad things that were happening in the world. Like, even now, I mean, just like telling you about this, like I feel tears coming to my eyes. Like we're all traumatized to a certain degree. Now, we have resilience, and people have different levels of resilience. You know, a lot of people start piping up about mental illness or struggles or different things like that. And then you have this whole group of people that's like, well, not everybody can be dealing with that. Oh yeah, that's a tag word. That's trending. That's this. And I'm like, how about maybe we don't downplay the fact that every single person that's living on the earth right now was created for a garden, but they're living on a battlefield. Even if you grew up in a peaceful, secure, steady home, you were still exposed to a lot of stuff that humanity has never been exposed to before, ever. Like when did the internet become like widely popular? When did this measure of connectivity become this popular? This is a giant social experiment on whether we're actually even able to handle what we are being inundated with information-wise. I'm thinking about that while I'm thinking about resilience. And I feel a little belligerent, to be honest. And I know that I actually just don't, my body hurts today, which makes me get a little bit cranky. But maybe stop telling people that they're being fearful when they're being wise, and when they're preparing, and when they are dealing with their trauma, because we all have it. We are all somewhat disassociated. This morning I woke up and there's all this stuff on social media about aliens in Miami and all this crazy crap that's going on. I'm sitting here reading this and thinking, I should have some reaction here. I'm largely numb to unbelievably bad news, or unbelievable news, or news that I don't know how to process. I'm largely numb. I am. And I'm a very, very self-aware person, in case you didn't know this. I'm actually incredibly introspective. I think about things a lot. I process things a lot. I've gone through a ton of healing. I love counseling. I love mental wellness. I love taking care of myself and recognizing when I'm not doing great, okay, I got to pare back and take care of myself. I want to teach my kids that. It's a culture that I really hope to have encouraged here. But like... people are literally reporting some crazy crap happening, and I'm watching it like it's freaking Men in Black. And I'm just like, this is not a healthy response. And I think about the number of things I shared a few weeks ago. My daughter was at her college in Nevada, and there was a shooting, and I'm getting a text message from my kid that's hiding in a bathroom. And then, of course, it spurs up these conversations about gun control, and it spurs up opinions. Everybody's got opinions, and I'm like, hold on a second. I think we need to take a step back and acknowledge the fact, okay, maybe we're not seeing everything clearly, so let's take it back to a very, very simple human level. Tomorrow, what are you going to need? The one thing that I know that I'm going to need tomorrow is food, shelter, and like basic necessities, a way to protect my children. Like, that is my most basic human need. And I'm thinking that maybe that is why resilience brings so much peace. That when we are dealing with an amount of information, and everybody's got opinions, there are agendas on every single side. We're going into an election year, which you already know is going to be incredibly divisive on a face-to-face human level, especially if you're on social media. Like, that's just the way that it goes, because people have an opinions, and here we have a competition where we've got this versus that, and you have to pick sides. Obviously, that's going to be a divisive thing. But on a very, very, very basic human level, all the disassociation and the trauma and the pain and the fear and all of that stuff to the side, I think one of the reasons why growing food is so grounding is because at that very basic human level, it reassures you like, hey, you're taking the steps to make sure you and your family are covered, no matter what. And in a world that sells fear, and it does, if somehow you have not realized that, it sells fear. I could post a video saying, there's a pig in my front yard. Or I could post a video saying, what I saw in my front yard is not good. And the latter will get 3 times, it will get clicked on 3 times as much as if it's just chill, mellow, and straightforward. And it's human psychology. We want to have a good grasp on threats. We want to feel safe. At our deepest level, what we desire is to feel security. Whenever we are living with so much insecurity being fed to us, your nervous system does not know when you read about a threat that you're not in imminent danger. A lot of times it's why your heart rate goes up, it's why you start sweating, it's why you start feeling sick, it's why you reach out to somebody because you need to talk about it. Like, your nervous system doesn't know. And here we are living with whacked out nervous systems, dealing with all of the disease and the pain and the mental illness that causes. Yeah, grow a garden. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, okay? Say you never have a job loss, there's never a storm, there's never a supply chain issue. Say all you do is just you eat homegrown tomatoes in your garden and your nervous system chills out. That's enough. That's enough for me. That is enough for me. I want to say this because I want to be able to talk about prepping. I want to be able to talk about why I'm doing these things. I want to be able to talk about seeing a news headline that says something about aliens without somebody trying to argue with me political stances. I want to be able to talk about news headlines that I see during an election year, and the aggression and the division and the pain and all of those things. I want to be able to talk about that without somebody trying to go toe-to-toe with me in a political argument. I got opinions. I don't think that they're worth that much. I really don't. Like, my opinions are mine for me to decide what to do with my life. Now, what I'm talking to you about here, this is me thinking about for the broader audience, like what would be of value to them. Yeah, the world sells fear. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Like, refuse to be in the market for fear. And with that, come back to taking care of yourself in such a way that you actually say, like, what is this doing to me? How am I responding to this? Wake up with some awareness to how you're actually navigating the world that we live in. And look around, and if you feel insecure, layer in resilience in whatever way you can. I know some of you guys are in really impossible situations, and I am not speaking to you without compassion. I promise you, I know what it's like to feel impossibly stuck. And even worse, I know what it's like when in your knower, it is going off, this alarm is going off, do something, do something, do something, because we know when we're not safe. We know in an innate level when we are not okay. We have discernment. And when you know in your knower that there's an alarm going off and you feel a sense of urgency and you feel stuck, it's like being tied to train tracks and seeing a train coming. It's awful. I know. Do something. Do anything that you can. Learn to bake the bread. Learn to cook the pot of beans. Grow the pots on the patio. I don't know exactly how to tell you why this works, but I can tell you from experience that it does. And when I sat here this morning looking at, myself years ago, I just wrote calendar on this. It's calendula. That's what happens when I try talking right at the same time. Oh well, we'll figure it out. I remember being in that place, and I'm so thankful that I started when I did. And I'm so thankful that I turned my waiting room into a classroom. And I know that everybody's journey is not going to go like mine did. I'm still figuring out how mine's going. I mean, there's still twists and turns along the way. If I could tell you nothing else in January of 2024, layer in the resilience. Pick the dandelions and learn to do something with them. Every single day, there will be some opportunity for resilience presented to you in the form of a lesson, of some little resource that you don't realize. Seriously, one of the things I was talking about today that I'd really like to learn, I'd like to learn how to make soap, but not just how to make soap by like ordering all the supplies. I would really like to learn how to make soap like they did 200 years ago. One thing that I've been crocheting, and that seems like it's just a hobby, but I have been making warm things like cowls and hats, and that's of value. And then I started thinking, I really want to learn how to knit well so I can make socks. Now you can buy a 12-pack of Hanes at Walmart for, well, it's probably like $17 now, but obviously, we live in a world where you can have cheap socks. And when you can have cheap socks, there's a message said to you, there's no point in learning to knit socks. It's going to take you days to knit a pair of socks. And it's not worth that much time. But I want to pretend, and maybe this is just me liking here's the scenario, what if situation. I want to pretend like those Hanes socks don't exist. And instead of having a laundry basket that's overflowing with so many cheap socks that I hate matching them, and so we just sit next to the laundry basket and pick out a matched pair the best we can, and sometimes we wear them mixed matched. Instead of doing it that way, maybe I'll just have 7 pairs of socks. And I'll just wash them. I think somewhere in learning resilience, you come up to those kinds of choices. Okay, do I want convenience or do I want resilience? And sometimes we're gonna have both. There are still many places in my life where I'm still living with the convenient option. But I wanna have the awareness that I'm making a choice. If I'm living in convenience, I want it to be by choice, not because I was completely unaware and I just went the path of least resistance. So there's my thoughts. I thought I would talk more about seed starting. Golly. How do y'all bear me? Jeremiah calls it my breathing fire moments whenever I get this way. Whenever I'm super intense and I'm ready to storm the gates of hell with a squirt pistol. He's like, this is my wife who breathes fire. It matters though. If there's passion inside of us, let's just say that it matters to be a passionate person. And somebody somewhere feels hopeful at the idea that they're not tied to the train tracks. And if that's the case, then I would say it again and again. It's a wild world that we live in. It's an interesting time to be alive. I'm actually incredibly optimistic. I just, as a person, even with my here's the scenario fascination and loving to read about wars and loving to be prepared and all those different things, like I'm actually very, very optimistic for just humanity as a whole. Like I love us. I think we're awesome. I think that there's a lot of hope. I think that seeing so many people wake up to the poison in their food and wake up to their dependence on a broken system, and seeing so many people make massive moves in their life to like move towards better, it gives me incredible hope. I can't imagine that there's ever been a more hopeful time to be alive. I really mean that. And I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't choose a different time. I actually think that all of us who are here right now on the earth, we are here for such a time as this. This is our time. So gosh, yes, that gives me hope. But awareness makes me want resilience. And hope gives me the strength to obtain it. And so if I can share that with you, and you can also feel that strength, and you can also feel that hope, and you can know that you're not tied to the train tracks, and I will share it with you again and again. Even if some people think it's too intense and they think that I'm breathing fire, and even if in the middle of that spiel I accidentally labeled my calendula as calendar. Well, those are the seeds that I intended to start. I didn't even finish my tea. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. Hope I didn't burn your eyebrows off. This, being able to turn this camera on and reach the world with my thoughts and share it with you and hear your feedback, being able to have what I genuinely know to be the kindest audience. Do you know that I will spend weeks with this size platform and not get a single negative comment? It wasn't always that way. It's really become more that way in the last couple of years, but like, that's unheard of. That is unheard of. And I don't know how or why, but I am so thankful that somehow the kindest people and the most passionate and resilient people, the hungriest people, like somehow ended up sitting here at my table with me. It's a huge blessing. It is a layer of resilience for me. So thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I bless you. Until next time.